UDL in Action podcast wishes to acknowledge First Nations peoples in Australia and across the world whose songlines traverse the globe. We pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, whose cultural traditions inspire and continue to educate.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the UDL in Action podcast, where we explore inclusion, innovation, and the real-world impact of universal design for learning in classrooms of every kind. I'm your host, Rebecca Rosenberg, and I'm so glad you're tuning in for episode 5. Each episode, we respond to real questions from real educators, teachers and leaders who are designing for learner variability and rethinking what inclusive practice can look like. In this episode, we are continuing our conversation with a focus on the early years education because our last episode generated lots of feedback. And of course, I'm joined again by my brilliant co-host, Rhonda Laswell from Bartholomew Consolidated School Corporation in Indiana. Someone who brings wisdom and practical know-how to every episode. Rhonda, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's so lovely to see you. I look forward to the end of every 3 weeks, I can assure you. So, Rhonda, to continue our conversation from last episode, I just want to reframe one of the questions we had from the wonderful Shell for you to further expand on because there is just so much to impact. So the question was, could you elaborate on the differences between the Montessori approach and universal design for learning? Do these frameworks complement each other, particularly in early childhood education?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. And that is actually where I think my passion lies often is the intersectionality of those two and how they lie together. Because when you think about universal design for learning, you're really talking about designing an environment where students can really develop their executive functioning skills and their learner agency. And in a Montessori model, what you're really doing is allowing them to explore more individually and in in an environment that's more of just like a standard general learning environment that's designed by UDL, it still gives some of those elements that you would see in Montessori. So I think that UDL actually allows you to think even more critically in a Montessori model. And what I mean by that is, when we think about a student coming in and being ready to learn, right?
Yeah.
We're thinking that they're there, they're open, and they're ready to learn. And there's a really big difference between engagement and compliance, right? And one of the things we see often in Montessori is because a child can direct their own learning, right? You have a tendency to be more engaged. And one of the things that I hear on the flip side of that in general ed, especially even with the younger kiddos, is that, well, they'll just pick the easiest thing or they'll just always go to the station where they can play and not where they're really, learning, especially with pre-K. And we do a lot with the Reggio model here, the play model. But the thing is, kids gravitate towards what's engaging to them, but they also do appreciate and enjoy success. And they don't mind being challenged if they're in a safe environment that supports risk taking. And so when we think about the Montessori model, I think we would be wise in general ed to think about that model even in a standard public school setting, because the more layers of UDL that you pull back and open up, the broader the options and the broader the scaffolding that you can create for students. And I'm not saying that's a Montessori model, but what I am saying is you can build in those pieces that really engage a student and allow them to develop executive functioning. And I think that's the key, whether you're looking at a Montessori model or you're looking at just a general ed classroom. How are students engaged? And are they being compliant? Are they being engaged? And then really, how are you developing their executive functioning skills? Because if you're developing their ability to learn how to learn, it's not going to matter if it's Montessori, it's not going to matter if it's general ed, and it's actually not going to matter if it's math, science, social studies, whatever.
Yep. So they really intertwine without a doubt.
Absolutely, because when you think about it, what you're doing, okay, so when we look at the guidelines, the 9 guidelines, and I seriously would just love to like have this up on the screen. But when you think
Yes.
about this, what we're looking at is building their capacity. So these are designed very intentionally to go from the more teacher-driven, right? I do, then we do, then you do. And Montessori focuses really heavily down here. But there isn't
Yes.
any reason why we can't, in the general ed classroom, really develop all of these. Now, I'm not going to say a teacher should go out and try to do 3 things for every category in the 9 guidelines tomorrow. They would be too overwhelmed. We start
Yes.
smaller and remember that all those baby steps add up. But when you boil it down to the base level of learning and the difference between the two, our goal is really the same. I mean, your goal's the
Yeah.
same, is for your students to be purposeful, right? Resourceful, knowledgeable, strategic, goal-directed, motivated. Either model, that's what we want. So we want to teach the ability to learn, and we want to really hone in on that learner agency and the executive functioning.
Excellent, excellent response. I loved when you said that students actually enjoy being challenged when they're in a safe environment. Can
Yes.
you give an example of where you've seen that?
Oh, absolutely. So when students come in the door, I think we kind of think, well, they're here, they've had breakfast and they're ready to learn and they've had a good night's sleep, right? Well, we know that's not true for every kiddo.
Yeah.
Not every kiddo comes in feeling safe and ready to learn. And
Mm.
so what we can do and what we have done is we provide an option for kiddos who don't have that support to transition and have a soft start in the morning. And so for our groups or populations of kiddos that maybe just don't show up right, ready to learn, providing an opportunity to come into the space, maybe a space that is a transitional space where there's soft lighting, some
Mm.
calm music, maybe a snack, maybe some sensory activities. And then from there, once they feel regulated and grounded, they can say, I'm ready to go on into my room. Or for some kiddos, that space can be built into the learning environment. And we've done that in a lot of our rooms. We call them kind of the cooling spot or the amygdala first aid station. And so I've often seen teachers provide that transition piece, especially in the morning. And then sometimes we need that option again like after lunch when we're coming back
Yeah.
in,
Mhm.
and we've been out and been in a non like structured environment. Sometimes coming back into structure can cause some issues with the transition. So
Yeah.
I think that is a really important thing to think about. Now, for kiddos who do come in ready to learn, um, we still need to make sure that the environment is providing them with options to feel a felt sense of safety socially and emotionally, physically
Yes.
and
Yes.
structurally. And we know that physically they're safe,
Yeah.
but, we need to make sure that we're posting expectations and there's a sense of fairness and safety in the environment and that they can advocate for what they need socially and emotionally. And then from there, even instructionally, an example would be, calling a kid up to work out a problem in front of the class on a whiteboard. That can hijack a kiddo and shut them down. And so being aware of those kinds of things, making sure that you're doing the activities and even the instructional practices in a way that do not hijack the brain and cause it to shut down the executive part. Because when you do that, you're not really seeing what a kiddo knows.
Yes,
So that
definitely.
that felt sense
Definitely.
of safety has to be physically, socially, emotionally, and instructionally. There's 3 layers there.
Yes, yes. And you've mentioned that in previous podcasts. And honestly, it has been leading my practices as
Mhm.
well, because consistently thinking of those 3 areas is so important. I do love
Absolutely.
the reference to the amygdala first aid station though too. That's excellent. It's a great visual.
We
Thank
all
you for
need
that
those
response. Yes, most
sometimes.
certainly. Most certainly. Okay, so our next 2 questions, Rhonda, come from parents of young children who are engaging in formal educational settings for the first time.
Mhm.
Rhonda, one of the parents asks, as parents new to the education system and navigating a recent disability diagnosis for our child, how can we advocate in ways that shift the focus from deficits to strengths,
Mm.
while recognizing also the signs of inclusive UDL aligned practices in our not intentions, with educators?
So I think that one of the difficult shifts that we've had to make in education is moving from that deficit-based model to more
Mm,
asset-based model. We know
yeah,
that punitive discipline is very deficit-based, and positive behavior structures and reinforcements, posting expectations is very asset-based. So, for example, instead of saying don't run, we say the expectation is that you would please walk, right?
yes,
And so, what we have to do as adults is we have to flip that from a negative to a positive. And we want to think about not what we don't want you to do, but what we do want you to do. And I think that's the first step. That's the
excellent,
very first
excellent.
step. So, having conversations about what the expectations are for students is a good entry into that conversation that focuses on the positives versus the negatives. Then I think from there, you can shift to talking really about the principle of engagement, because the principle of engagement is talking about, those welcoming interest and identities, and your disability is part of your identity. And so making sure that we're including those students' interests in the things that we talk about and that we do. And I think it's really important to be able to have those conversations with the students as well. The students that advocate most for other kiddos often, you know, are the ones who really step up in those situations. And it's not a secret. We know when someone has a disability most often, right? I
Mm,
mean, there's usually some sort of sign, something that we feel from them. And kiddos are great at advocating for, stepping in for
mm,
those students. And so making sure um, that you're advocating that your student be included in the ability groups, and that we're not putting all the kiddos maybe who have some sort of learning disability of language in the same group. We want to make sure that we're intermingling our kiddos, and that um, so this is really interesting. Dr. Lisa Carey, who works for the Kennedy Krieger Institute, has done a lot of research. And kiddos who are in environments with other kiddos with disabilities, both the general ed kiddos and the students with disabilities perform better when they're in inclusive environments. And
I totally agree.
it's just a fact. And so
Mm,
if a parent can speak to the engagement piece, that's really important, that sustaining effort and persistence, and then finally the emotional capacity. If teachers are building in options for those things, then it will be a much more smooth transition. The other thing I would really highly recommend is just asking some very specific questions about the vocabulary that's utilized in the learning environment. So, for
yes.
example, let's say that the teacher has 3 expectations: being respectful, responsible, and safe. And we talk about what that looks like in the cafeteria, on the playground, when we're working in small groups, I say parents do that at home. What does respectful, responsible, and safe look like at the dinner table? Look like when we're in the grocery store? Look like when we're
Mm,
going to visit a friend at a friend's house? And if
yeah.
you can invite some of that vocabulary into the home, then the transition for a student, especially, I mean, it's always hard to transition from being home to being in a structured environment, and maybe even more so with some students with disabilities. And sometimes it's harder for mom and dad than it is the kids. But if you can bring some of those practices and that vocabulary back into the home, then it
Yes.
really helps the student transition. And it opens the doorway for conversations with the kiddo even more, because it's
Mm,
not like they're living in two separate worlds. They see it as a
yes.
more fluid experience.
Absolutely. And consistency is happening at school as well as at home. And so it's not unexpected when going from one environment to the other. And
Absolutely.
as you keep referring to, if the students feel safe because of language that they're familiar with, then that's going to enhance executive functioning and learning and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
That's
shared
excellent.
vocabulary, I think, is really important. I think
Yes.
that, especially
Yeah.
for kiddos who are they're learning to read, right?
Yes.
And so as they learn to read, we're building their capacity for their vocabulary. And anytime we
Mm.
can bring that vocabulary into more than one context, it's easier
Oh,
for the brain to make that web of connections. And it's a more
yes.
profound learning experience for them, and a more effective one as well.
Yes. Yes. Have you seen that before, specifically with any families or any little people that
Oh,
have little
yes.
people
So
transitioning into kindergarten?
absolutely. So we have individuals in the school who they're kind of a liaison between home and the classroom, especially for students for whom there are challenges there. And one of the things that we talk about when we sit down with the teacher and the liaison is the talking to the liaison about having conversations, because they'll go in and do in-home visits, talking
Mm.
about the shared vocabulary, but also talking about, do you have structured time? Do you have a time for bed? Do you have a time for bath? Are you reading a story every evening? What are the behavior expectations you have in the home? And really talking to parents about that consistency, that helps so much. So absolutely, yes.
Great.
That communication
Yeah.
between teacher and parent is so important, because that relationship impacts the student's experience with
Yeah.
their education. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
when we've
Yeah.
done
Without
that,
a doubt.
the parents are happier,
Mm.
and the kiddos understand.
Yes, yeah. They understand that the teacher and the parent or the carer are in consistent
Yes.
communication as well. That's
Yes.
great. And they're looking out for them. I really like that. That's excellent. Okay. So another one of the parents, Rhonda, that listens in asks, as parents, how can we partner with teachers to better understand and apply universal design for learning principles? And what can we do at home to support our child's sense of agency and confidence in their learning? I mean, you partially answered that in the previous question, but would you like to expand a little further?
Yeah, so what I would recommend is, and there's nothing wrong with this, just asking the teacher, what are the learning goals this week for language arts? What are the learning goals this week for math? Especially with our little ones, the two things we focus most on are social skills, language, and then some sort of, work with shapes or numbers and numeracy. So asking them what the goal is, I think, would be really, really valuable, because then you can also build in some opportunities for that at home. But I think at home, the most important thing you can do is build in those opportunities for
Excuse
success,
me.
because we know that when a student is feeling success and they're getting that dopamine for the response that they've made and it's been correct, we know that that feels good, right? It feels good to know we accomplished something. So I would say parents need to really focus on building in those opportunities for success for the student so that they can feel very confident when they walk in the door at school.
Excellent, excellent. I love those ideas. That's wonderful. There's that confidence is also what builds and builds learner agency.
Well, yeah,
It
and it also feeds
enhances learning.
risk taking. And we need our
Yes.
kids to take risks because learning is a process that's very recursive. And so
Mm,
it's not like we just go in, fill in the blank, get the right answer. Learning is building that network in the brain and all the different
mm.
ways to get to the what may be the right answer. So we're building that network and that web. And the more repetition at the younger ages we can do, the better, of course. But also, again, it goes back to building in those positive reinforcements, those high fives, those successes. Focusing on that will build not only confidence in the student, but it really allows the student to feel empowered. And it does build student agency at the same time because they're building their capacity for stamina as well.
Excellent. These are brilliant responses. Thank you so much. Thank you. These are great examples today, once again. Before we wrap up, though, what's one takeaway you'd love our listeners to walk away with?
I think that it's that learning is not about the destination, it's about the journey, and that it's a process, and that teaching our kids that the process is what really is important versus just filling in the blank. Learning's not about filling in the blank. Learning is about learning how to learn.
And enjoying learning.
Yes,
It's
lifelong.
it's yeah, absolutely. It's a privilege, isn't it?
Yeah, and if we learn how to learn, then it, there's no limit to where we'll go with our success.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So well said. So, a big thank you to our listeners for their insightful questions, and thank you to all of you listening and leading this important work. If today's episode sparked ideas or reflections, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at udl.in.action.podcast@gmail.com. And if you'd like the show notes or resources mentioned, just get in touch as it's no problem. Until next time, though, keep designing for possibility, not predictability. Bye for now.
Toodaloo.
Bye.